Hi everyone. Today I'd like to talk to you about Japan's apologies for the comfort woman issue. In my film Shusenjo, I have a section dedicated to the issue of apologies, but I thought it would be good to touch on it a bit more for added clarity, as it seems like there's still a lot of confusion over this. In my film, I mentioned that Japan has apologized for the comfort woman issue many times in the past, the 1993 Kono statement being the most significant one, as it has become custom now for prime ministers of Japan, including Prime Ministers Abe and Suga, to uphold this apology to show their remorse for the comfort woman issue. So what does this Kono statement say? The government study has revealed that in many cases they were recruited against their own will through coaxing, coercion, etc., and that at times administrative military personnel directly took part in the recruitments. They lived in misery at the comfort stations under a coercive atmosphere. As to the origin of the comfort women who were transferred to the war areas, excluding those from Japan, those from the Korean Peninsula accounted for a large part. The Korean Peninsula was under Japanese rule in those days, and their recruitment, transfer, control, etc. were conducted generally against their will through coaxing, coercion, etc. Undeniably, this was an act with the involvement of the military authorities of the day that severely injured the honor and dignity of many women. The government of Japan would like to take this opportunity once again to extend its sincere apologies and remorse to all those, irrespective of place of origin, who suffered immeasurable pain and incurable physical and psychological wounds as comfort women. That's a pretty sincere apology. And if the prime ministers are upholding that statement, then what is the problem? These Koreans must be insane not to accept that. Especially considering that shortly after that statement, the left-wing Murayama government of 1995 set up the Asian Women's Fund, which offered apologies, compiled historical documents, gave health and welfare support, and $20,000 to each survivor as atonement money. But the thing we have to ask is, what kind of apology have the former comfort women been asking for? After all, it's really up to the victims to decide what is an acceptable apology as long as it is reasonable. So what the former comfort women have been asking for since the 90s is for Japan to take legal responsibility for the comfort woman system. Taking legal responsibility entails enacting legislation that grants official reparations to victims, accepts responsibility for violating international laws that existed at the time, officially apologizes on behalf of the Japanese government, and promises to educate and inform Japanese people on the history of the comfort women. And these demands don't seem unreasonable, especially considering that other governments have done things like this before. Like when the US government enacted the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 that granted official reparations to Japanese Americans who had been interned during World War II. Going back to the Asian Women's Fund, the fund was considered Japan taking moral responsibility as there was no legislation passed, and the money offered to the survivors was jointly from private citizen donations and the government, and purposely called atonement money instead of reparations to avoid taking full legal responsibility. I know it may sound nitpicky, but the problem with Japan only taking moral responsibility is that we get into the kind of situation we are in now, where South Koreans feel like former comfort women haven't gotten their proper justice, and Japanese people feel like South Koreans can never be satisfied. More on this later. One of the big reasons that Japan believes it doesn't need to take responsibility for the comfort woman issue is because of an agreement made in 1965 between Japan and South Korea, where Japan paid $800 million to South Korea that, according to Japan, settled all claims regarding their occupation of Korea completely and finally. In 2005, documents that had been kept secret for 40 years regarding the agreement were released, which, according to experts, shows that the agreement covered property and forced labor wage claims, but did not include crimes against humanity like the comfort woman system. And I think the clearest argument against Japan's claim that the 1965 agreement settled claims made by former comfort women is that Japan didn't even admit its involvement in the comfort woman system until 1992. So how could Japan have taken responsibility for the comfort woman system in 1965 when it didn't even acknowledge its involvement until 1992? Doesn't make sense, right? In 2015, an agreement between Japan and Korea supposedly settled the comfort women issue finally and irreversibly, with Japan creating a fund for reconciliation and healing, but again, not official reparations and not taking legal responsibility. And most importantly, the former comfort women were not consulted for this agreement. A number of the former comfort women did accept the money, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they accepted the agreement, as the money was for reconciliation and healing, which sounds more like a friendly donation than money for reparations to settle a wrongdoing that would bring these women justice. Japanese media presented this acceptance of the money as an acceptance of the agreement, to make it seem like the former comfort women have no right to complain anymore. And if that sounds like this money was given to the women to silence them, I think that is a fair assumption, especially considering that the comfort women history has been disappearing from Japanese history textbooks, and considering that Japan has been demanding that comfort women statues be taken down in places like South Korea, the US, and Germany. These demands to take the comfort women statues down are inconsistent with making an apology. If Japan was truly apologetic and remorseful, wouldn't it be more consistent to bring one of the statues from Korea to be installed in Tokyo, as opposed to demanding that they all be removed? Also, it needs to be mentioned that erasing the comfort women history from textbooks is breaking the promise that was made in the Kono Statement. The Kono Statement states, "We shall face squarely the historical facts as described above instead of evading them, and take them to heart as lessons of history. We hereby reiterate our firm determination never to repeat the same mistake by forever engraving such issues in our memories through the study and teaching of history." So when prime ministers uphold the Kono Statement as a form of apology, and at the same time support revising and erasing of the comfort women history behind the scenes, it is really an empty apology that would be impossible to accept as sincere. If Germany were to erase mention of the Holocaust in textbooks, we would say that Germany has gone back on its apologies. Teaching the history is actually the core of the apology. It is the reaffirming of the apology through generations. When Japan apologizes now, what is it even apologizing for? Japan supposedly upholds the Kono Statement that says, "The government study has revealed that in many cases they were recruited against their own will through coaxing, coercion, etc., and that at times administrative military personnel directly took part in the recruitments. They lived in misery at comfort stations under a coercive atmosphere." But its official stance now is that the former comfort women were never forcibly taken away and were not sex slaves, and Japan even went to the UN to make this statement. This is why, even if Japan apologizes and upholds the Kono Statement 1,000 times, it all sounds like lip service. So considering all this, I'd say that South Koreans do have a justification for being upset with Japan and demanding it apologize and take legal responsibility, since taking moral responsibility has allowed the erasing of the comfort women history from textbooks and allowed the government to deny key facts about the comfort women history and undermine past apologies. On another note, I've noticed that many Japanese people are angry at and even hate Koreans over this issue, which seems a bit twisted when you know all the facts. And I think this is happening because of the way this issue is being presented in Japanese TV news media. When they report on the comfort women issue, it's usually a report on the protests in South Korea or when a new statue is being erected. So the way it is often presented is that they will report that a comfort women statue is being erected in whatever country, and then they will talk about the 2015 agreement and how Japan has given money and apologized in the past. And with these two bits of information, the Japanese viewer fills in the blank and naturally comes to the conclusion that Koreans are sneaky, irrational, and unreasonable. Now, if the Japanese media had given the viewer information about the comfort women issue being erased from Japanese textbooks and how that is breaking the promise of the Kono Statement, and that these statues are an attempt to prevent history from being erased, then I think the viewer wouldn't come to the conclusion that Koreans are irrational. Or if Japanese media explain that former comfort women are not making new demands all the time, that since the 90s they have clearly laid out the proper way to apologize and take responsibility, and that Japan has never delivered on that, then I don't think Japanese viewers would be annoyed at Koreans and throw their hands up saying, "Here we go again, nothing will ever satisfy these people," when Koreans ask for a sincere apology. Basically, Japanese media is fueling the fire of hatred against Koreans with this issue. Of course, Korean media does this as well in their own way, which isn't good, but Koreans do have a reason to be angry because it is true that Japan colonized Korea and caused a lot of suffering to Koreans and has undermined past apologies and is currently trying to erase this history. What a huge slap to the face to the victims of colonization to erase their history. Japanese hate for Koreans is rooted in the racist idea that they are irrational, unreasonable, and too emotional, and the media constantly reminding people in Japan that Koreans never accept apologies and can't be reasoned with fuels this racist sentiment. Finally, I want to stress the importance of Japan taking legal responsibility for this issue. If Japan took legal responsibility by law, it wouldn't be able to erase the comfort woman history from textbooks, and it wouldn't be able to undermine apologies through denying and revising history. Also, the Japanese media wouldn't be able to create hate against Koreans with this issue. Basically, we wouldn't be in the situation we are in now. And most importantly, Japan taking legal responsibility would mean acknowledgement of the crime committed and would give these women the long overdue justice that they deserve. Not to mention, it's the kind of apology they've been asking for since the 90s. So no matter how many times Japan upholds the Kono statement or apologizes, it will seem insincere if legal responsibility isn't taken. I hope this cleared up any confusion about Japan's apologies for the comfort women. Thank you for watching.